Good morning, and thanks for joining us here on Treasure Coast Solutions. Every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock, I get to blab on and on about economic stuff that you don't care about, but I get to do it anyway because I pay for the hour. So you too can be a radio host, just pay for the hour. You won't be as good as Evan because he actually is a professional, but the rest of us, we pay money, we get to talk. So it's a good deal. So going from that basis, you know that you don't have to listen to this. And if you want to turn to WPSL and hear some people that, maybe swap shops on or something like that, you can feel free. But hopefully you'll stay with us and chat a little. We'll just talk about some things. My name is Mark Breckbill. I'm a CPA, ex-banker, got a lot of wounds, so I can kind of talk about some things that have happened to me in the past, maybe keep them from happening to you. Although as a kid, that never works, right? I mean, we remember our parents used to always try to tell us, don't put your hand on the stove. Don't put your hand on the stove. Don't put your hand on the stove. So what do? You put your hand on the stove, right? But as soon as you burn your hand, now you kind of maybe don't put your hand on the stove anymore. So I'm kind of that version. I'm the economic version of don't put your hand on the stove. That's what I'm about. And that's what kind of the show's about. Uh, it's about talking or airing out some things. I I, I don't know. Previously I was talking about this show and I said the whole purpose of the show is to have somebody just go, never thought about that. So it may be because it's so crazy it didn't even come into your realm of thought, but sometimes it's just something that we don't think about, and and a lot of times we don't think about finance and economics, and I understand why. It's boring as hell. I mean, nobody likes to talk about that stuff. I used to read. I mean, I'm a CPA. When I was in college, I had to take my tax classes and all of that. And my tax classes, yeah, I would read my tax book, my tax textbook at night because it would put me to sleep in a heartbeat. It was amazing because I was always cramming for some test, so I'm behind trying to catch up, and reading these tax cases and trying to figure stuff out, and that's boring. I mean, some of the stuff, and I tell you where it's really boring is where you don't have a frame of reference. The When you come from a point that you've never really done it before or seen it before or been involved with it before, it's hard for some of these economic principles and some of this finance stuff to make sense, and a lot of the tax stuff doesn't make sense. And one of the reasons it doesn't make sense is that a lot of things that are in the tax code are relative to uh, producing some result, some social result, not necessarily a revenue result. The tax code originally was written primarily to generate revenue. That was the purpose of it. It wasn't to manipulate social behavior. It wasn't to cause you to do something or not do something, or to buy something or not buy something. It was designed to effectively and efficiently raise revenue to cover the very small things that the U.S. government was supposed to do. And as the federal government has infringed upon the rights of the states, and I want to get there a little bit because this is something that doesn't get talked about a lot, or if it does, you're considered a radical. But uh, you know, if you look at our Constitution was designed, and it does reserve all rights to the states that aren't specifically provided for in the Constitution. So, and frankly, our founders didn't provide much that the federal government would do. That has been expanded over the years through interpretation and through expansion of the law. But what our what our founders really wanted, and I'm not necessarily saying this is 100% right or that what we would want right now, because that's the other thing you hear a lot of times with uh when people talk, oh, well, our founding fathers were geniuses, and yeah, no, they just were trying to, they knew what they didn't want, and they tried to put something together that would not result in what they had. They didn't want to be like England. They didn't want religious persecution. uh, they wanted to be left alone. They didn't want somebody coming by and taxing their land and taking their cattle and everything because of the tax. So they knew what they didn't want, uh, and and they got really lucky in what they did about what they do want. But sometimes, to try to argue that we should do exactly what the Constitution said is not necessarily the way to go. But that doesn't mean that you can judiciously change it or that you can arbitrarily ignore it. Change the Constitution. That's what I'm saying, is that in general, the idea was that if there was a power that needed to be reserved to the federal government that wasn't allowed for in the Constitution, it doesn't mean that it shouldn't be, but it wasn't. Don't try to manipulate the Constitution so that you can kind of say it does. Change the Constitution, because if people really believe that that right should be reserved to the government, and that was the basic provision of the Constitution. That is the crux of the Constitution. It was that we're going to allow, we're going to limit anything that the federal government can do, and instead, we're going to reserve those rights to the states. And if the states want to change those rights, then they can hold a constitutional convention and change the rights. And that is the process. And it's funny right now that uh, that we have that situation, and people tend to not understand it. And when you talk about states' rights today, you get bullied into saying, well, you're a racist because you want states' rights, and the states, you don't want the federal government imposing these laws and rules on you. And so, for some reason, that makes you either an anarchist or a racist. And most of us are not any of that. We're probably libertarians, independents. I don't know. Even Southern Democrats, uh, blue dog Democrats, whatever you want to call them. You know, most of us believe in personal freedom, and and that's all that we're talking about, and that includes economic freedom. That includes the ability to do our jobs, to work, to make a living, to maybe be successful. It's funny, people say sometimes, well, what do you care? What do you care that the wealthiest people, those people, and this is the wealthiest, those people making combined over $450,000 a year? Now, think about it a minute. I saw a tax return for a 30-year, well, a 20-year-old that works for Amazon and makes $135,000 a year plus a stock grant. Uh, so we're talking about fairly low levels, fairly high levels of income for people who are basically beginning in the workforce. And if inflation hits those numbers, which it already has, inflation is already embedded to some degree in wages. And by the way, that's where you don't need the Federal Reserve and you don't need Yellen to tell you that we've got inflation under control, or we don't have inflation under control, or you can tell when inflation is out of control or no longer able to be adjusted when it's in wages. When you can't hire people because they don't feel like they're paid enough, when when that inflation hits wages, which it has now, when it hits wages, it becomes permanent, because nobody goes back and gives people a raise and then later on says, you know what, we're taking that away. Yeah, they may try to freeze your salary for 10 years if that inflation goes away, but they never take it away. It always becomes a base that is going to always be there, because unless we go into a depression and the economy collapses and nobody's employed, and then you're just happy to have a job, and somebody's out there working for nothing. But if as long as the economy hasn't gone into a depression, even if it's gone into hyperinflation, as long as there's stuff out there, that wage increase becomes embedded in the system. And again, inflation is a tax. It's just a tax. So that's when you hear people talking about this and the net effect of a you know anywhere between a $2 and a $10 trillion tax bill. Nobody knows what the number is, but uh, when you talk about that kind of a number, uh, people first of all glaze over. Nobody. Have you ever written $1 trillion down on a piece of paper? Write $1 trillion down on a piece of paper. You probably don't know how many zeros that is. I mean, I don't think I do. I never deal with trillions. I I, I have dealt with billions. I've dealt with hundreds of millions. I used to deal with those numbers all the time, and I do know as a CPA, working for big CPA firms with major clients, those numbers become become meaningless. You just lop off zeros. The financial statements still stay the same. It's just a question of whether it says millions omitted, hundred thousands omitted, billions omitted. The numbers all, they for the people looking at those numbers, they become meaningless, and they don't really realize how big those numbers are. They really don't. And some of you may have seen. I don't remember. It's been a while since I saw it, but somebody showing dollar bills, and if you stack up dollar bills, what's the difference between a million, a billion, and a trillion? And it's unbelievable that at $1 trillion, I think it can stack. If you stack them a dollar bill on top of each other, it goes to the moon or something. I mean, it's like a big. It's so large. It's mind-boggling that you can't even think about that being a possibility. Um, there's I think if you have $1 trillion, you can spend like $10 million a day and never hit principal, never run out of, never run out of money. That's how big $1 trillion is, and so it's crazy with this kind of debt. They always say, "Well, geez, uh, it's a shame that we got to do this so that we can help the poor." If they would have just let people keep the money that they've spent, if they would have let them keep their taxes, their Social Security taxes, if they let them keep their income tax money, if they would have if they would have kept inflation down so that inflation didn't hit them, people would be very wealthy today. But unfortunately, if they'd have just let us keep our Social Security dollars, and you say, what do I mean by that? Well, we our Social Security dollars, when they take our Social Security from us, and when our employer matches it, that the Social Security was the original 401k. I mean, it's the matching concept, right? So if we would have put that money aside and earned 3%, we would not have a problem today. But what did we do with that money? Oh, we put it in the trust. We put it in the Social Security trust. Yeah, yeah. And then what did we do? Well, we borrowed from it. We issued bonds and we borrowed from it. There's no cash there. There's no assets there backing that Social Security. It's the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. By the way, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government is the same thing that backs Treasury notes and Treasury bonds and Treasury bills and all of those things, mortgages and SBA loans. It's just the full faith and credit of the U.S. government. That is just their word that they're going to pay it back. And that word is only as good as the economy that supports it. If the economy that supports it fails, you get nothing. There is no Social Security. There is nothing out there for you. There's no Medicare. There's no free health care. There's no free college. There's no universal income. There is nothing. The only thing that can produce that is the economy. You have to have an economy that continues to generate inflation adjusted GNP. And as soon as you stop doing that, you've got problems. And you can tax away as much wealth as you want, but if the pool of wealth is shrinking, that's less tax dollars. So you can't have the entitlements increasing and the pool shrinking. The economy has to produce that. And right now, it needs to produce 18 to 20% returns. Now, somebody's saying, well, the stock market's producing those kind of returns. Stock market isn't the economy. The stock market is a large roulette wheel that people bet on and think that they're investing. The stock market is not. It has ceased to be a legitimate investment vehicle years ago. Nobody looks at earnings. If you own stocks, I'm going to ask you, what multiple is your stock selling at? Multiple of earnings is your stock selling at, and what is the market value of your stock compared to its cost basis, compared to its actual cost basis, assets that could be liquidated? What is that? Nobody knows those answers. Ask your broker that question. You can look it up, but ask that broker a question. Do you ever ask that broker that question before they buy the stock for you, before they buy the mutual fund, before they buy the S&P 500? No, you don't ask that question, right? Because you don't care, because you think it's going up. All right. I think it's going to land on 00. Same thing, same concept. Just go to Vegas, right? And that's the kind of crazy thing that we got, is that there is no correlation between the stock market and economic development and growth. It just isn't there. They throw out a lot of numbers, but with the multiples of earnings that you're paying for certain companies, you are significantly betting on the future. I mean, big numbers betting on the future. Now, you say, well, I'm going to go in bonds. Well, if you go in bonds and you get inflation, then you just lost it in the present, because anybody who's in any kind of long-term bond right now probably needs to be, needs to look at that and say, is this a smart move? It might be if you're going to be able to hold that bond to maturity. But even then, and this is what people forget, say, well, I've got a 10-year bond, and, I'm not planning on selling it. I'm just going to get the income from it. And I'm going to, just spend the income. And then when the principal comes due, I'll get paid back. It's a government security. So naturally the government's going to pay me in 15 years or 10 years or whatever it is. So I'm good. Well, yeah, no, maybe not. So if inflation is up, then you could have sold that bond, taken your loss, and reinvested it in something and made more money. So there is an opportunity cost for you to sit there and hold that bond when it is paying it an interest rate less than the market. And that's a loss. You just don't see it on your tax return, but you have lost value. That's the same thing as losing money. You just didn't recognize it because it is a opportunity cost. Most people don't look at opportunity cost, right? So right now, that's going to be a significant factor. If you get stuck in a 3 to 5 year bond and we have 15% inflation, you're going to eat that up. If you sit there and don't reinvest that, you're going to eat that up. Now, some people are saying, well, yeah, and I'm going to stay liquid so that when those rates go to 15%, I'm going to buy a government bond. And I'm going to buy a government bond and earn 15% for, U.S. government bond. Well, first of all, that may be the case, but what happens here, and people saw it before, very few bonds have any kind of penalty on them if they pay off early. So if I buy a treasury, let's say I buy a Fannie Mae security, which is a mortgage product, right? If now interest rates start coming down, let's say that I was getting paid 12% on that Fannie Mae security, which means that mortgages were, roughly 12.5 probably. If I'm getting paid 12%, I'm thinking, okay, I got 12% for 30 years potentially, or 25 years, or whatever the bond is, this Fannie Mae bond is. But what's going to happen if interest rates go down? What happens if interest rates are at 12 and they go down to 6 or even 8? Well, everybody refinances, right? So that bond pays back. So now you don't have a 12% bond. You have cash. which you've got to look to reinvest, and you're not going to get 12% because the market's now 8%. It's the same thing with treasuries. If at some point in time the treasury doesn't have a penalty in it for repayment, for early payment, then the U.S. government is then going to refinance that debt. We're going to reissue treasury bonds at 8% or 6% instead of 10 or 11%. So your bond then goes away because it pays you back. So it's very hard to lock in. It's very hard to lock in that high interest rate long term. Now, back in the day, those of you that are old enough to remember Jimmy Carter, back in the day, some people did lock in 10%, 11% treasury securities. And they held on to them, and they had tax-free money from a couple sources, and so again, you got to be careful though, because even corporate bonds have penalties in them usually for prepaying early, especially if interest rates are bouncing around, but they still allow it, and there's still a point in time where if interest rates drop enough, it makes sense to liquidate and for the company to pay the premium and cash out because they can refinance at a cheaper rate. So, that's kind of the thing that we're looking at going forward. I just, unless we have an economy that is producing inflation adjusted earnings that are supporting the current level of wages and productivity, then we're never going to have a successful economy from the standpoint of the individual worker. It's funny. People always talk about it. It's when it's wages. They talk about it like it's the wage earner, it's the worker that causes the problem. Because I hear all this time, oh, it's just it's as soon as the unions or the wage earners, get these numbers locked in, or have these numbers, then that's when we have inflation. No, what actually happens is that to a large degree, inflation it affects everything, and what happens is that the employer will try to keep everything relatively stable. The business, they try to keep everything stable. So they'll switch to cheaper supplies and try to keep their supplies down. They will try to switch to a better equipment and technology, artificial intelligence, and all those kind of things to keep their additional labor costs down, so they can reduce overtime, so that they can keep they can keep the actual labor costs down. They'll try to reduce all those others, but when they've done that, they have no choice but to raise their product, because at some point that product starts going up, and then the employee, who's always last in the thought process, and I don't mean that really negatively, I'm just saying that because they have the least amount of power, they tend to be last in the process, and inflation is already in the system. The companies have already raised their prices before wages go up. Wages are a reaction to inflation, not a cause of inflation. They're a reaction to an increase in costs, because labor can remain constant, which it did for years here. It can remain constant as long as inflation is zero, because the people can still buy the same products. And so at that point, if you can maintain a stable equilibrium where the price of a product covers all of those costs, materials, even if one of the costs go up, even if you can reduce the other costs, you can maintain some stability. It is almost never labor that goes up first. It's almost never labor. Labor doesn't go up, and then they try to reduce material costs. And labor, it's usually that they've reduced everything else as low as they can get it, and then they have to try to increase prices. And their only opportunity is to increase prices. Now, in some industries, that's not possible. You cannot increase prices because the competition is so great that until everybody simultaneously increases prices, you you can't you can't get a price increase, because if you could have gotten a price increase, you would have. So you have to wait until the market bears the price increase. Well, that's where either a business or an industry can go out. That's where labor can fall out. Jobs are lost at that point. In a competitive environment, you're potentially, if you can't raise prices, you have to reduce costs. If you've already reduced costs, you've cut quality of your products, so you bought cheaper materials. You've mechanized as much as you can. You've already taken care of all of that. Now, you've got to fire people because you can't afford them. So, or you can't hire them to get the job done. And that's where we're at right now. People aren't wanting to take jobs. They're better off being retired. We've got a lot of people that are leaving the workforce. Why are they leaving the workforce? Because they're retiring. Many of them have sold businesses early, maybe before they wanted to, but they sold their business to get out. Many of them have just decided that, now's the time. Many of them had decided they were going to go to 70 before they took their Social Security. Now they're going to take it at 66 and maybe pull out of the workforce so they don't have to work as long. That's going to be a problem down the road. All of this is going to be a problem 15, 20 years now, when this population ages, doesn't die, and still is on Social Security and doesn't have the retirement money because they retired earlier than they should have. They should have continued to work. You know, as a, I'm jumping a little bit here, but along this same line, I'm going to talk a little bit about retirement income. And I said I'm not a financial planner, and I'm not. I mean, I am, but I'm not talking about it on the show. But what I am going to say is that as a worker, as an employee, as an entrepreneur, whatever, you have earning capacity, right? And that earning capacity has value. It can generate income. Off prior to the, i.e., retire early, decide to get out and take Social Security or do whatever. And not do something else, not get another job, not do whatever. If you turn that retirement earnings capacity off before it had zero value because you couldn't find a job or you weren't capable of working, you've given up wealth. You have given up wealth. People don't think about that in retirement. The individual does unconsciously. They say, I don't have enough money to retire. I'm going to continue to work. But what a lot of people don't do is consciously do that. So you've got, average Joe like me that says, I'm going to work till I die because, first of all, I'm probably not, because I'm at some point going to lose earning capacity. Either I'm not going to be able to physically work, I might not mentally be able to work or whatever. But as long as I can work, I have earnings capacity, and I'm going to continue to use that because it replaces retirement. And investment advisors always want to tell you got to have stocks and bonds and earn all kinds of income. But the fact of the matter is that if you can work and you can always generate income, then retirement is not, retirement income is not, it doesn't have to be as high because it can be supplemented with other income. Now, at some point that's going to stop, and unfortunately, you never know when that's going to be. So I'm not saying that you should necessarily plan on this is how I'm going to do it. I'm not saying my plan of I'm going to work till I die makes sense, although my will does say just haul my chair out and cremate me. But I am going to I might have a different philosophy because I want to do that. But what I'm getting at is many people retire and give up a significant amount of future earnings capacity. And some people convert that earning capacity to their family, maybe to their kids or something else, by turning their business over, by maintaining that business and transferring it. And that's the way that they get paid for what they've done. Unfortunately, the government taxes a lot of that, but that's how But that's one of the ways that you get value out of your earnings capacity. But a lot of people, when they're retiring, don't think about that. I've got a client that let's say sell their business for $20 million, or let's say 30. Because I got one that's $30 million, right? So they're gonna, they if they don't convert if they don't convert the earning capacity that they currently have, which is probably a couple million, million and a half dollars a year, somewhere in that range, in terms of value and everything else, and actual earned income, cash income. If they don't convert that to something else, they're losing that income stream for as long as they would have had it. So let's say it's just $1 million. It's $1 million, and I'm losing that income stream. Let's say I shut that off, 10 years, 20 years before necessary, because I could have transferred it to my kids, and they could have made money off of it. But let's say I don't do that. Well, that's $1 million a year for 20 years. That's a lot of money, even discounted to the present. That's going to be $15-16 million that you're giving away. That's half of what you sold the business for. Now, if on the other side of that, you also pay 40% in taxes, so you're paying $12 million in taxes. So you've given up roughly $16 million in earnings capacity, $12 million in taxes, $28 million. All right. You've given up to, now, are you being paid for it? You're getting $30 million. But that $30 million is based on is to a large degree based on that earnings capacity, but it's also, got some other value in it, some equipment value and other things that you're giving up. So the point being that unless you've structured the deal so that you're getting paid for some of that earnings capacity, you're not maximizing your personal value. And really what we're talking about with financial planning is not all about cash and stocks and bonds. It's about maximizing your economic value. And that can be done in a number of different ways. The way it's done in the United States over a long period of time is through the transfer of real property. Real estate transfer, real estate acquisitions and purchases is the most significant wealth generator, and generational wealth generator in history. We think about the original bastions of industry, the robber barons, a lot of people call them, whatever. And we think about the railroad people and the steel industry and all of those kind of things. And we think about how they formed these companies and they made all of this money. But where the big money came from? The big money came from real property. Most of those people were, because of the income that was generated out of the businesses that they owned, they took that money and they bought stuff. And most of the stuff they bought was real property. They bought acreage in New York City. They bought property around the United States. They owned property all over the United States, eventually all over the world. And all of that property increased in value way more than the business that they own. The original Vanderbilts, Rockefellers, the people like that, their wealth, if you start looking around, their wealth is in real property still. Most of them don't have a significant amount of cash wealth left because that cash was spent by other generations. but many of them still have a lot of real estate value left. They are what, you would refer to as cash poor, real estate rich. They have on paper, they're extremely wealthy, but it's illiquid. They can't get to it. Now, you can tax them, but they don't have the cash to pay the taxes based on that real estate. So they will have to do something else. They will have to, donate or convert that real property to some sort of charity or foundation, maybe that they still get to generate some sort of an income off of, or maybe they get to just, make some charitable contributions, but they're going to do easements, or they're going to, they're going to do some conservation easements. Maybe they're going to do some anything that offsets land rich. They may sell some of that property and using 1031 exchanges and other things, convert it to income producing real estate so that they've got income coming out of it, whereas now they don't. A lot of these properties are, are family compounds and estates that have been owned for years, multiple houses, and they don't generate any revenue. Um, so if you tax them, they're going to have to sell it in some manner or another, unless you offer them some opportunity to, convert that. But that's what's going to happen. And that's, by the way, that's in this tax bill. There's this this concept that we're going to tax wealth. And I will tell you, if that's what you're trying to do, you'd be better off doing it through the estate taxes and just confiscate the estate, because a wealth tax is it is going to impact the entrepreneur or small business way more than it will impact even the wealthy, because they have options. I can't sell my business and reinvest in something that's more tax efficient. If I own real estate, I can sell my real estate, and using 1031 exchanges and other things, I can invest in that. But I can invest in things that generate income. But the net effect is I can also transfer that property generationally. So if I tax it, I will stop that wealth. But I also stop the family business from being transferred. I'll stop the transfer from mom and pop to the sons, daughters. I'll stop the sale of real estate, or the transfer of real estate, family homes, family farms, all of that kind of stuff. And by the way, family farms are overrated because there's not that many of them. And frankly, from an economic standpoint, we are supporting a dying industry because they cannot efficiently operate. And I grew up in the Midwest, so I'm telling you, I grew up in corn country, bean country, and the people that owned 10,000 acres or 5,000 acres and owned the land, they were able to make it by. Those people who lease the land, who are farmers, family farmers who are leasing the land over the years, or who have split the acreage up among generations, in they've wised up to some degree, but 20, 50, 60 years ago, the dad, because this is always was, the dad would divide the farm among the sons. And so now you take 9,000 acres and you got, instead of one 9,000 acre farm, which is efficient, relatively efficient, borderline efficient to be able to farm, because you got to buy $500,000 combines and, all these kind of things. Now you've got 3,000 acre farms that aren't sharing any equipment, aren't sharing any, labor. And all of a sudden now you've got 3 inefficient operations that don't have any chance of making money. And so that's what happens. So what happens is those sons go out, and because they can't make money at 3,000 acres, they go out and lease 4,000 or 5,000 acres. Well, if you're paying for that land, you're not making any money on it. It's very hard. You have to own that land, because you have to have the ability to be able to control your costs. And land is your major cost as a farmer. Real estate is your major cost as a farmer. So, and you say, well, if you own it, you still got an opportunity cost, but at least you don't have an actual cash outlay. So if the market collapses, and you lose you just don't make any money this year, um, you don't go out of business. Whereas if you're leasing, you're probably out of business. The farm goes under. You can't handle two of them, that's for sure. And so that's kind of where that whole what's going to happen with this tax bill. If you start taxing wealth, you will put you're going to put some of these businesses, the profitable ones, out of business because they're not liquid. And this is the biggest problem I have with government is that they don't seem to understand that there is a difference between income and cash. I can make income. It doesn't mean that I am generating cash that I can spend. I may be generating cash, but I can't spend it unless I'm going to liquidate my business because I have to put that cash back in the business. If I make $1 million on a self-employed business or a small partnership or a family business, let's say I make $1 million net, right? I don't have $1 million in cash that I can take out of the bank and go buy cars and boats and all those kind of things. I don't have that money. That money has to go back in to buy new inventory, to plant the field next year, to purchase equipment, to do all of the things that are necessary to keep that business going, to pay employees while they're making the product that I'm then subsequently going to sell. I have to have cash for that. That's called working capital. I have to maintain that. The bigger you get, the more working capital you have. The bigger you get, the less income equals cash that you can spend. Now, if I work for Lockheed and they pay me $200,000 a year, they give me cash. So that's real money for me. And I actually can spend it. So if I have a job where I'm making $200,000, I'm where somebody's paying me, and then I have a business that I own that makes $200,000, I am much better off. I am way better off financially with a $200,000 job than I am with a $200,000 business because I'm not going to get $200,000. I'll be lucky if I clear 80 grand on a $200,000 business. I'll be lucky if I can clear 80 grand that I can actually spend, and alternatively could have gone and gotten that job to make 200. I'm way better off. People don't understand that. And now they want to tax me. So now they're going to tax me on that 200. And let's make the numbers, a little bit more interesting. Let's say it's $1 million. It's $1 million, and I'm going to have maybe at that point on $1 million, I might have $400,000 that is available. I'm going to get that kind of money, 400. But I made $1 million. If I had a salary that paid me $1 million, if I had dividends that paid me $1 million, interest that paid me $1 million, then I would be much better off because I would have $1 million in my pocket. I'd still have to pay taxes, but I have $1 million in my pocket. If I make $1 million in business, right off the top right now, with taxes the way they are, I'm going to pay roughly 45% in taxes. So I'm going to make 550,000 is the number I have. The rest of it goes to the government, and that's just to start with. Right? That's just to start with. The rest of that cash has to go out back into the business. A lot of it does. Say 20 or 30% probably does. So now all of a sudden, I've got what, maybe 350, 300. So I made $1 million a year and I put 300 in my pocket. Over here, I got a job working for Amazon or for, Apple, and I make $200,000, or I have 200,000 in dividends from $1 million in dividends that come from them. That's $1 million in cash. I got to pay tax on it, but it's still $1 million. I don't have to put it back in their business. Apple's got to worry about that, right? So that's the thing that people don't understand. That's the thing that government doesn't understand. And that's why you can't tax wealth. You never will be able to tax wealth. And any economist will tell you that if you tax wealth, wealth will go away. Not because people will hide it, but because it is illiquid and it has to be liquidated to pay the tax, and therefore it's gone. The wealth is abandoned. It goes somewhere else, to somebody else that is going to have to build that wealth back up again because it's been taken out of the system and now it's not available for future use. So keep in mind, that's the concept of wealth. That's a concept people don't deal with because when they think of somebody as being wealthy, they think of them as having cash. But in our country, a lot of people are wealthy because they have assets that are worth money that are in excess of what they paid for them. And that wealth is able to continue to grow because they don't have to liquidate it. If you tax it, they will liquidate it, and that growth will not continue. It will come out of the companies that they've invested in. It'll come out of the businesses they've invested in. So keep in mind, wealth is not cash, and therefore it's hard to tax because people can't pay it. And second of all, keep in mind that there is an earning capacity that every individual has. And if they give up that earning capacity early, they leave wealth and money on the table. They leave opportunity to generate future wealth on the table. Those are things that you have to take into consideration when you're looking at this type of stuff. And you cannot successfully tax something that is not liquid. It will destroy the economy. And I think some people know that, but obviously that is in the system right now. And that is one of the things that's in this tax proposal as a way to generate is a wealth tax, a 5% wealth tax. That doesn't seem like a lot. Oh, the wealthy can afford it. But if you think of it, if it's not cash and it's 5% and they're worth, first of all, there's a lot of costs incurred to determine how much that value is. You've got to have appraisals done. You've got to have valuations done on businesses. There is a substantial cost in collecting that tax and paying that tax, calculating it. So not only is there a 5% tax that's on illiquid assets, but you're probably looking at another 5% that's on the cost of determining what that tax is. So keep that in mind as well, that some of this administration of this tax is extremely expensive and will force businesses out of business. Anyway, so that's kind of what I wanted to talk about this morning. We'll talk about some of this a little bit more. I'll try to give you some update on what's going on with this tax bill. Hopefully we'll know. Right now it's stalled, thank goodness. But we'll be back every Wednesday morning from 9 to 10 o'clock. I'll be back here talking a little bit about what's going on in the world right here on WSTU Digital 1450. We're Martin County's very, 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 very old station.